What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of A Thinking Man's Podcast. With me, as always, Tommy Styles. And today we are joined by podcaster, prep coach, none other than Scott Mcnally. Scott, what's going on, man? Long time coming. Thanks for joining the show.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to be here. And I'll tell you what, I'm pumped to see what you guys have done with the channel so far because you're doing good stuff. And I'm proud to be a part of it today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You're here. Yeah. You've inadvertently or indirectly been a huge inspiration to what Tommy and I do. And not only inspiration, one, to get started, but then, you've really served as kind of a North Star for us in both, in both senses. Like, it started just as the one show with me and Tommy. And, I reference this all the time, but you gave Tommy some advice before we ever started. And it was like, man, if you guys are going to do this, you have to remember that the audience doesn't really necessarily care about you guys individually. They care about the value that you bring them and what type of value can you deliver to make them want to listen. And so that really shifted and shaped everything that we wanted to do at first with the show. And then it's grown into a channel. And again, you kind of set the blueprint on how to do that. So we're kind of just following in your footsteps.
That's cool, man. I'm grateful that I can have had that influence. And honestly, it was something I had to figure out for myself. I started podcasting in 2015 and it was a very fun thing at the start. And back then it was very different. Like it's evolved so much, but I realized that, and I realized that, what, and I had to look at like, what do you tune into? If you've never seen somebody before, you don't know who they are, and they're not like a big name celebrity, like you take that out of the equation. You're just some random dude. And there's at this point, man, the market of podcasting is so saturated that there are so many other people that they can be clicking on and tuning into, people who have a more polished presentation, people who've been doing it longer, maybe have a funner story, maybe they just look better than you do. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, so if you can share something that they're going to benefit from by tuning in, the way that I've understood it, and I actually, I had read a book, I can't remember which book this was because I've read a bunch of them about marketing and podcasting and really just sharing content. Was the idea is that you want to be able to provide value, meaning that, and you want to be able to, and that's the way the podcast grows. So if you're walking down the street and you find a $1 bill, you're probably going to pick it up, right? If you find a nickel, you're probably just going to leave it. But if you find a buck, you're going to pick it up, but you're probably not going to make a big deal out of it. Yeah, you found a buck. Now, if you found a 20, you're probably going to go home and you're going to tell everybody that you see that day. You know what I mean? Like, dude, you wouldn't believe it. I found a 20 just rolling in the grass and I picked it up, man. I freaking found a $20 bill. And that's what we want to provide to our audience every time that they tune in. You want to give them that 20 because you not only want to educate them, but you want to give them something that they recognize is of value, and they're going to tell their friends about it too. Because, if we look at the way mass media works, they have the funnel system where they basically, they market to anybody who's tuning in to network TV, and the masses find out about it, and then the few trickle in, versus we're more of a reverse funnel, grassroots, where we have the one, and the one turns into two, and the two turns into four. I know we have some of my audience members are also your audience members, guys like Lucas, who he's going to tell everybody about your podcast, and that's going to help. And that's how we can benefit and we can grow. And at the same time, the reality is that I personally learned so much from podcasts. They help to shape a lot of my education, and part of it is my learning style. I do really good with being told, being able to hear things, being able to see things. Those things really connect to me, and so that's the way I've realized I can give back too. So it's a learning process, but you got to kind of get over yourself, because nobody cares about you, at least at the beginning. Then over time, people connect to you, then you've provided value, and then your worth grows to them as well, and then your circle will care about you, and that's kind of a cool additional side effect that comes down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting point, because that's people ask me all the time, or not all the time, but like, you know, the conversation come up like, what shows do you like? What movies do you watch? Whatever. These conversations come up day to day. And I've
Yeah.
never really been somebody that watches shows or movies. Like it was just never really my thing. My main like content consumption has always been podcasts. And like
Yeah.
you said, it's helped in every aspect of my life. If I wanted a better morning or sleep routine, I found it through a podcast. Training, diet, PEDs, any of it was always all through podcasts. A lot of it, the stuff that you were putting out. I remember being back on like the Advices radio, like
Ah,
finding stuff that nobody else was putting out. Like you were one of the guys that was giving us access to like high level bodybuilders and coaches before it was even really a thing. Like where you could hear some of these guys sit and talk for an hour and a half. Like, man, I can remember, like vividly remember sitting in the car on like a long drive that I had and listening to like the hugest fuck series that you did. And I think
yeah.
Big Ron was on it. And it was just like, man, I was kind of back and forth. Like Classic had just come out, and I'm like, man, I kind of wonder if my shape fits that. And I listened to that, and I was like, fuck it, like I just need to be big as hell. So it's a great point about like, you know, if that was kind of naturally a passion of yours and of ours, that it kind of parlayed into us doing it too. Um, but I know I should let Tommy speak because you guys have go way back. So we had a list of questions that we wanted to get going, and I'm sure that they will kind of just roll into more conversational stuff. So Tommy, anything you want to address Scott with before we get rolling?
Yeah, I'll just give the kind of the nickel background tour. Like Scott and I go way back to 2016. So before I moved to Arizona, I'm from the same area that he's in.
Yeah.
Trained at the same gyms, around the same people. I mean, there's a list of names that we both know and frequent. So Scott was the first person I reached out to when we were starting this podcast. And that kind of leads me to the first question. It wasn't like I didn't reach out and say, hey, Scott, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. What do you think? I had already, Joe and I had already made the commitment, like, yeah, we're going to do this. What equipment do I need? And what advice can you give me, if you can give me any? So that leads me into my first question, as I'm sure you've gotten this question a lot over the years with what you've built with, the trajectory of Think Big Bodybuilding Media is, if someone comes to you and wants to start a podcast, how do you handle that question?
It's a good question. And I'll first say too, it has been a pleasure, Tommy, to watch you progressing over the years. I mean, I met Tommy when he was a firefighter, and you were definitely passionate about bodybuilding, but you weren't all in like you are today. You hadn't quite taken that full step, and you knew you had your career at the time, and it was like there was a lot of other things you had going on in your life, whereas it's been cool to see you evolve into what you've evolved into, where this is your full life passion now. And not only that, but you've also followed through with making incredible progress. Congratulations this year, by the way, man. It is literally like, dude, when I'll go on Instagram and I'm scrolling along and then I see like you just won your show, like that genuinely makes me fucking happy. Like down at the core, man, it makes me happy to see that. And it makes me happy for bodybuilding too. You know what I mean? So to me, that's really cool to see, and to know where you've come from. So it's been a pleasure to watch that. Now, yeah, as for your question, it's a question I don't really talk to a ton of people about. I feel like the majority of people who ask me stuff are asking about like how to run trend. You know what I mean? They're asking, or something related to bodybuilding. And that's where I put the majority of the focus. And honestly, I just haven't invested a lot of time into talking about those things with many people. So you were one of the few people I've talked to that about, and anybody that I'd consider to be a close friend. I am actually, because I realize at this point it's been almost a decade since I started, and I should do something with that. So I'm actually going to start kind of like an online course type thing, and I think I'm going to have, like, so far we figured I'm going to have like 6 sections to it. There'll be like the Q&A stuff, all that type of thing. It'll be like a reasonable price, but I know that I can basically package up something so that somebody can just do that and then basically plug right in and go. And I want to cover the technical side of stuff, but equally I want to try to cover the other side too, like the actual, the content creating side, because there's so much that goes into that, and that continues to build. But I would say the number one thing that I would tell anybody, and I do tell people, is to just get started, to figure out how to get on. At this point, it requires a camera. When I started, it was just a microphone. At this point, as long as you have decent sound, as long as you can get, a cheap USB mic that sounds okay, just get started, and it'll improve from there, and I know that's what you guys are doing. And looking at you today, like, you guys have already evolved from, the 100 episodes ago when you started the show. So, it's pretty, you guys are living proof, of how that works, as am I. But that's the number one thing, because you just need to get your hands on it. You need to get it going. And the way I look at it is that each podcast is not, it's not a novel. Each podcast is like a magazine article. People are going to consume it, and then they're ready for the next one. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a small little clipping. And then you have the opportunity then to start over and do it again, and start over and do it again. And then the next most important thing is, and I know it's one of the things I told you, Tommy, is to be consistent with it. You have to be consistent. If you make a deal with your audience, then you have to follow through with that deal. Otherwise, it's basically like you're giving them your word. So if you go back on that, if you say, hey, we're going to be out every Tuesday or every Monday or every week, whatever, and then you don't show up for 3 weeks with no explanation, you do that a couple of times, and you're going to lose your audience. Versus if you show up, just by the fact of showing up, you will connect to people. People like consistency. We all do. I mean, we're bodybuilders, right? Even though I'm not like at the competitive point in my life right now, I'm still in that. I love the consistency that bodybuilding provides, and that's what people want out of their content too.
Yeah, it's reliable and it's predictable. And I think that just generally, as humans, we want that. We want predictable. We want things that are like, we can rely on them. And that was another, I have to give you credit for that too. You did tell us that at the beginning. And it was like, hey man, like, once you start this, like, whatever your schedule is, it's bi-weekly, it's every Tuesday, whatever it is, you have to stick to it. So be prepared for that. And we did. We took that advice wholeheartedly. And I think that, even more than the value that you provide within the episodes or whatever, that's the biggest thing, like, in terms of growing an audience and keeping an audience, in our experience with it, has just been get it out consistently, like, keep your word. So yeah, I give you credit for that. And I'm looking forward to the course, because that's something that we're going to join too. Because, we're infants in this. And like you said, you've been doing it now for nearly a decade. And it's not like you just have one show. Like, you've been the driving force behind literally an entire channel, where there's all these wide ranging segments and characters that you have. So yeah, man, I'm excited to see it. When, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what's the timeline on that? Are you close to having that, like, coming available to an audience?
So in October, there's a big event that Elite FTS is holding called Swiss, that takes place in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
If you guys get a chance, by the way, it's freaking phenomenal. It's a big symposium of a bunch of great speakers are going to be there. People like Dr. Eric Serrano will be talking, which I heard him speak last year, and he said like 3 take-home points that changed my thinking. People like Ed Cohen, who was like the best, power lifter of his day. Yeah. Incredible dude. People like him are going to be there. Chris Duffin, the list goes on and on. My wife, Victoria, has always done a really good presentation there, Victoria Felker. And, it's a really good opportunity to not only hear these people talk, but then also get to hang out with them and ask them questions. It's a weekend long event. Anyway, Ken Kanakin, who put it together, asked me to come out there to do a small talk on using podcasting as a means to drive your business. So I'm planning on having it together by October for that event. Well, that'll be the game plan. And I want to add too, you mentioned the variety of content. I wanted to say something, because this is a part of sharing stuff. I think is part of sharing stuff is like being able to articulate your thoughts. And I'm always still working on that. And something I haven't really said a lot that I want to start letting people know is the reason that I do that, the reason that we have, like, we run about 4 or 5 different podcasts on the network featuring different hosts. The reason I do that is because I think it's important that when we're creating our own ideas, that we don't just draw from one source. There's a lot of people out there that I think are doing great content, but I don't want to rely on just that person alone. I want to be able to listen to him and then listen to these other ideas too. And then from there, over a longer period of time, I can start to see where the ideas overlap and the picture begins to come clear, and I can begin to form my own ideas. So instead of just listening to one person, I think the way I've been able to learn has been overlapping a lot of different ideas, and you start to hear similar themes and things start to make more sense to you versus just being spoon-fed by one person. This is what you need to do. And I think that that's been an important part of my educational process. And that's why we do what we do, because I want to be able to share that with others too.
That reminds me of a quote. If you are green, you are growing. If you are ripe, you are rotting. I think like that's what you're applying to podcasting, and then just obtaining knowledge in general is how you've gone about the core. And that's kind of the advice you gave me in a nutshell that I brought back to Joe, and how we've, it was always, don't get stuck in like a rigid routine of, only having the same guests or the same topics, or this, having the podcast has been like an addition to my personality, because I'm not very social outside of podcasting. So it's actually given me like an outlet to talk to different people, reach out to different people to ask them to come on, think of good questions to ask. So it's, there's a lot of benefits to it that you don't really realize until you're in the thick of it, putting them out every week.
Absolutely. No, that's, we had Dave Tate on the other day for It's Just Bodybuilding, and he said kind of something similar. He was like, I don't really talk to a lot of people. He lives a pretty insular lifestyle, and he was like, I just find people that I'm interested in, people that I want to get to know. And that's exactly what I've done too. It's given me the opportunity to have friendships with like literally Olympians. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, who am I to have this opportunity? I feel so grateful, to get to, and that's the other thing is like, you got to keep the humility too, because I've also seen where people start thinking that they're the Olympian, you know what I mean? And it's like, no, you're the podcaster. Let's put yourself in your place. You know what I mean?
Hey, just because you mentioned, like you're mentioning along those lines, along the way, did you ever struggle with like imposter syndrome, or just feeling like, man, who am I to be asking all these bodybuilders and coaches like to come on my show or my channel? Was there any of that, or right away, like just because your intentions were pure from the jump, it was never an issue?
Man, I don't know. That's a tough one. It really is, because I feel like I'm always still to this day waiting to feel like I've been successful. You know what I mean? Like I still feel like there's a lot more that I'm capable of. And I think I, like anybody else, can go through and compare myself to others. And it's like, we don't have 1 million followers. You know what I mean? It's like, so there is a lot of room to grow. At the same time, I've never felt like guilty about asking somebody that's great to come on our shows. And I think that's because we have a really good audience. Like, we might not have the biggest audience, but you don't need to have the biggest audience to have a really good community. It's like, if you could touch, let's say 1,000 people, that's pretty, heck, if you could touch 100 people, and you could change their lives in some small way, even if it's that some guy's depressed and he doesn't have anybody to talk to, and he just broke up with his girlfriend, and having that show playing in the background while he's sitting at home alone makes his evening a little bit better. If you can help him, like, you're doing something really positive, So I've always felt like there's a lot of value in the product. So I've always been pretty confident, I guess, with asking people to come on the shows, but it doesn't mean that I still don't struggle with like, imposter syndrome and feeling like, that there's a lot of room, man. I still consider us a very small channel by, the scheme of things.
I've been that guy that improved my night, just chilling at home,
no
just
kidding.
posing and doing updates, whatever, by myself, maybe going through a down stretch in life, whatever the case is. I've been that guy listening to your show. So I totally understand. And I appreciate that.
That's cool,
Another question from us.
I've been that guy too. I've been that guy too, listening to other shows, and that's why I know how that feels, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. Like we were just talking about, like this network that it grows into. Like the people that I'm in touch with, like Tommy was saying, is more expansive now from doing a show than it ever was in bodybuilding. And so like that was kind of a pleasant surprise to me along the way, like as it's grown. I'm curious, because you've done it so long, and thinking back to where you were like mentally when you wanted to start this, what to you has been the biggest maybe pleasant surprise or hidden benefit in doing all of this? Is it the network of people that it's grown? Is it people reaching out and saying, hey man, I've been really depressed and the only thing that gets me through it is your show? Or I'm just curious, like what were some of the surprise positives that have come from doing this? I mean, obviously you wanted to reach an audience and all these different things when you set out to do it, but along the way there were probably things that you didn't expect.
I didn't expect to meet and marry the most beautiful, most intelligent woman I've ever met in my life.
Nice.
So there's that. That's a smart man answering with that too.
It's the truth too. I feel like super grateful. But I would say that when I set out, my main thing, so I started out with a show called Bodybuilding Nerds Radio, and it was my friend and I, VJ, and we listened to podcasts. We liked all the bodybuilding podcasts. I met him at the gym, and we bonded over talking about the same bodybuilding podcast we both listened to. So, we trained and did our own workouts, and then we'd go over on the treadmills when we're done, and we'd talk about, hey, did you listen to this show? Did you listen to that show this week? Did you hear what this guy said? And over time, we decided, we're like, why don't we do a podcast of our own? So we did a podcast about all of our favorite shows, but it had a real tight format to it. We had little segments that we did throughout, and we tried to do interviews, and it didn't work. So I started interviewing people on a separate channel created that I called Advices Radio, and all those shows are still up if people want to go back and listen to them. Some of them are still dated, but some of the things that people said in some of those shows are now, they were game changing at the time, and now people are employing a lot of those ideas like microdosing insulin, for instance. Like that was something people just did bolus doses pre-workout or in the morning, and 6 to 8 hours later. Colette Nelson talked about that, and at the time I only knew of one other person. It was Mcnally was the only other person I knew at the time who was talking about that publicly. But I did it because I wanted to learn. That was the big thing, and I have learned. I in that way, I'm not surprised. I am surprised at how far I've been able to take it. Like, it's so cool, like I feel lucky, like I can be at an expo and Brandon Curry knows who I am. It surprises me sometimes when that happens. Like I met Chris Cormier in Germany at FIBO, and I was like, oh, hey, Chris, it's great to meet you, man. My name's Scott Mcnally. And he's like, I know who you are. And I was like, oh, wow. So it's still awesome. It blows me away. But yeah, I guess yes, it does surprise me to think of like how many people, and still to this day, like there's like I go to like a somewhere public, which I don't do a lot, and where there's bodybuilders, and even at like the Tommy, I just went to the Michigan State Championships, and like people there, they like knew who the show was, and to me that still like surprises me to this day, because I sit here in my studio and hang out with the wife and train in the basement, so I don't see all that all the time.
Yeah, no, it surprises you. I mean, even the messages Joe and I have gotten, I've been like, what?
That's cool, man. And that's all you need, like I was saying, you don't need, 1 million followers to make a difference. And using it as a business, you don't need 1 million followers either. Because look at, if somebody reaches out to you, Tommy, and they're like, hey, I want to work with you. They don't want to work with you because, like you had some flashy Instagram campaign. They want to work with you because they've been listening to you. They've dedicated an hour of their time every week to you, to listening to you talk. And they're like, hey, I want to invest my bodybuilding. I want to invest in this guy to help me. They already know a lot about you. It takes care of a lot of that basic stuff, In fact, I think most people who hire me as a coach now, they have listened to the shows. And so a lot of the stuff, it's nice. I don't have to explain it. I almost don't like working with people that don't know who I am. It's like mostly I want people to hire me because of that we already know they already know they feel like they're going to connect to me, you know, they already like the way I work.
Absolutely. Where along the process of all these years added up with, you know, bodybuilding nerds, advices, and to think big, where did you start kind of like formulating a vision and setting goals for your podcast journey? Was that the beginning, or did that come in somewhere in the middle?
I would say it was from the time I started Advices Radio, honestly. There's some stuff to that story that I could tell you guys off the air. But for the most part, though, it was from that point. And the reality is, you know, I went to art school. Okay. I don't have a degree that's going to allow me to go out into the business world and do something else. You know, I feel like that I'm kind of one of those people that doesn't fit in, honestly. Like, I don't see myself as somebody that fits into society very well, as friendly as I can be. And I know a lot of people consider me a nice person. I don't feel like I'm designed to function in a cubicle. And I'm not saying that that's bad for people that are. In fact, the world needs people like that, needs a lot of them, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes I wish I could be, because I feel like my life may have been easier. But the reality is that I am doing what I need to do. And this is the path that showed itself to me. You know, 2009, after I gave up on photography, which was my passion for most of my life, I moved back to Michigan, and it was 2000. I'm sorry, way before that, 2005, 2006, somewhere in there. I remember getting laid off from my job because the company was closing. And I remembered listening to Dave Palumbo, and Dave Palumbo had said at the time, back on MD, he had said that if you love what you're doing, then keep doing it, and you'll eventually be able to make money at it. So from that point, honestly, that's where I started looking at it as a business. So I guess it was, even to think about that question, I guess it was even before the podcast. It was more like 2007, actually. So now that I'm thinking about it, and I started just freely giving on the message boards, and then that grew, and then it evolved into, well, I could reach more people if I were to do like one big Q&A thread. So I started a big Q&A thread at a message board, and it was like an Ask Me Anything thread. And that thread got a bunch of views. And then from there, I had the opportunity to start doing the podcast. Or actually, it went a step further. I was doing another Q&A elsewhere, getting paid for it. And then from there, I had the opportunity to start the podcast, because I thought to myself, I could explain so much more in speaking than I can in writing. And that's the way my brain works the best. And then, so I guess from the time that I started podcasting, I knew it was going to be as a business, and I knew that I wanted to grow it into something, and I didn't know what it was going to be. It wasn't a clear picture, and it's still evolving today. But you know, this is kind of like Dorian. You know, Dorian said like that he didn't have a plan B. Like, really, this is my thing. This is what I do, and this is what my opportunity is. So I'm taking it, you know, and it's what it looks like is unfolding in the process.
That's really cool to hear. I mean, I didn't even know that. So that's, you know, insightful for me, but also it leads me to another question of, during the early years when you're on the message boards, you're putting out these Q&As, and I imagine that all the initiative that you're taking is driven by passion. Is there any expectation of a return, or are you doing it simply because you're just passionate about doing it and you're going to keep moving forward?
Yeah, no, I was just passionate about doing it, honestly. And then I started having people ask me like, hey, would you coach me? You know, and I was like, no, I don't do that. No, I don't do that. And like, even after I got a Q&A that I was actually getting paid for every month, I still didn't want to take clients on for a good chunk of time. And then when I did, I took on 12 clients for free. And I took it through the Q&A. I put out a call, and I said, hey, I'm going to coach a bunch of people for free. And what I want you to do is submit to this. I want you to submit pictures, your goals, and fill out this questionnaire. And I'm going to pick 12 of you. And I got like 300, 400 people. And I picked a handful of them, and like half of them followed through, half of them didn't. but I learned a lot in the process, and I picked all sorts of different people that had different body types. And at this time, like I felt like I knew what I was doing, but I didn't feel confident in taking people's money. So I did that, and it was a lot of work, especially to get it started. And then I did it again after that, and then I did it a third time, and it was either the third or fourth time then I actually took money from clients for coaching. And but up until then though, like it took me a while to feel confident in actually like getting paid for it, you know, for getting paid for actual coaching. But no, man, I felt like I just needed to be the best I could be and be able to provide the results. And then from there, the money would show itself somehow. You know, I didn't know how, but I knew that it would. I just literally listened to Dave Palumbo and followed his advice, for better or worse.
Now, with everything that's gone on, is there something that you look back on, and I'm sure, you know, you kind of at this point, I'm sure there's part of you that feels like everything played out as it needed to, or things happened for a reason. But is there anything along like the podcasting / channel journey that you look back on and think, man, that was a mistake? Like things probably would have happened for me sooner or better if I didn't do this.
You know what? You have to be really direct with people. And the name Advices Radio is it like when I first started the channel, I wanted to intentionally keep it underground. You know, I didn't want it to be accessible by the masses. I wanted it to be accessible by those that were hardcore, those that were truly seeking it out, you know. And that's one thing that's changed, is that now I try to help everybody, you know, and that I want to be able to help the people that are still at that hardcore end. But the reality is that there's for them, in a lot of cases, it's such an individual science. Science isn't the right word. It's such an individual art that it's hard to say specifically what Tommy Styles needs to do next. Like we could talk about one aspect, like training, you know, and some of that stuff that'll apply to you is still going to apply to a newbie, I guess. But I think that I was really kind of covert early on, and I expected people to pick up on that, and I expected people to embrace that. Whereas and that's one of the reasons, like I changed the name when I made a couple moves and I changed it to Think Big Bodybuilding Media. To me, I felt like that made more sense. The name made more sense than just like Thinking Man's Podcast. What the fuck is that about? You know what I mean? But what are you guys called now? You've got the new,
we have the Muscle Media Network.
The Muscle Media Network. Yeah. Anything that's on the Muscle Media Network, then I'm like, okay, Thinking Man's Podcast is on the Muscle Media Network. I can immediately connect that and tell you what that podcast is about now, you know, so that makes sense. Just like Advices Radio, you'd have to know, like, you know, you'd have to have watched Pumping Iron and remember the line that Arnold said, and how many people even watch Pumping Iron anymore. So it's like, what is Advices Radio? What is that about? You know? So, you know, Think Big Bodybuilding Media, it makes so much more sense. Just that in itself, like changes like that, you have to be really direct with people, you know, and I think you guys are doing a good job with that too. Like that evolution.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, we kind of took, I don't want to say we took that from you, but again, that was kind of you kind of being the North Star and guiding us, like, man, like we do need to make this more clear to people that this is going to be a network, all things surrounding muscle and bodybuilding. And, you know, we're going to try and bring some different segments, but they're all going to be related to that. So,
yeah. And don't get me wrong. It's not that I'm saying that Thinking Man's Podcast is a bad name.
No, you're totally right.
But it's like, it needs that, like, it needs that under the umbrella of, you know what I mean? Of a bodybuilding channel, then people will get it. You know what I mean? So, and that depends on what you want, but I know you guys want to try to be as successful as possible. So, you know, I think that was a solid move. I really do.
I think we might've had a little bit of that too, with that covert mindset, just because I feel like Joe and I was like, we don't want the name bodybuilding in our channel. For some reason, we had that like rebel, we're going to be different and not put bodybuilding in our title. So that is funny that it did evolve that way to like, now we have muscle in the name.
Yeah, it's great, honestly, man. And I get what you mean. You know, there's a line, because like at the same time, you want to be accessible, but you don't want to like sell out. You know what I mean? You don't want to be
Right.
bodybuilding.com. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I get it. I get where you're coming from 100%. And I feel like, you know, who I always look to is John Meadows. And getting to know him, in which we weren't like great friends or anything. Part of it was because I looked up to him too much to ever be his friend. Like it was just, I kept him at a distance on a pedestal, but getting to know him was a really cool part. Like he was one of the people I was really grateful to have met and gotten to know through podcasting. I really look up to him a lot in so many ways. And I still ask myself to this day, like, what would John do in this situation? Or how would John handle this? He did a fantastic job at becoming, you know, accessible to everyone, yet still reaching the hardcore. You know what I mean? Like he walked that line so well. He didn't have to sell out, you know?
I often tell clients if like they ask a question about an exercise or a movement and I don't have a video readily accessible, I just say type in mountain dog with the movement name in YouTube and I bet you'll get the right movement. And
yeah, you can trust it's going to be good.
It never fails.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he paved the way for everyone. Is there ever a moment during this journey that, you know, for whatever reason you've thought about hanging it up and putting the podcast thing on the shelf for good? Have you ever thought about walking away? And how did you handle that?
Not a day, really, man. Not a day. I mean, and you guys, I'm sure, have already seen it. There's going to be ups and downs, and things will go good for a few months, and then there'll be something that changes, and it feels like it's the end of the world. But you know, I've never thought to myself once. I've just said, God, this sucks. And I feel like it's all over. And then I just pivot, you know, and part of that too is just trying to think ahead, you know, like not putting all your eggs in one basket. I think that that's really important. Having a lot of, because like, who knows, man, YouTube could demonetize you or, you know, kill your channel at any given time. You know, we don't have control over that. And, you know, it's so have other resources and have the humility of accepting what that might mean too. Like if we lost YouTube, it would cut our viewership in half. But you know what? The half of what I have now is still better than what I had, you know, 3 years ago. So I'll take that, you know?
Yeah, that's true. You know, you had mentioned like you really looked up to John and it was cool, like, you know, being able to kind of interact with him through all this. I'm curious, is there a favorite interaction or story that you have with someone that you met through the podcast, like someone that you had access to, or a group that you had access to, an event that you had access to because of podcasting?
Man,
like
honestly,
even you just mentioning like a perfect example, not to cut you off, but like even just saying like that you have Brandon Curry come up to you and he's like, I know who you are. Like that is like, man, if you would have told yourself that was going to happen to you 10 years ago,
right?
You would not have fucking believed it. Like we interviewed Justin Compton and I even commented on our own YouTube video. And I was like, the 20-year-old version of me would not believe that we got to have this conversation. Like it's just
so
too cool. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. He was an incredible bodybuilder too, wasn't he?
Oh man. Unbelievable.
We were just talking about him recently. I wonder, so the question was that we had gotten was, you know, who do we think were great bodybuilders that never reached their potential on stage?
Yeah, I watched it. Yeah, I watched
okay,
this.
Yeah. And Dusty and Ron had both said, well, I don't know if he didn't reach his potential, meaning his physique. Like it was crazy just how complete he was and how big he was. I do wish, and I could see what the viewer was saying though, who asked the question. I do wish we could see like what would have happened had he been able to stick around, you know, for a few more years.
Like an achievement, like from an achievement standpoint, like another 6 years, what would he have been able to rack up? But I had to agree with you as you guys were explaining it, like physique wise, man, I think he did everything that you could have ever hoped to achieve with a physique. I mean, that it doesn't really get much better than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I honestly just, there's been so many things that, like I truly do feel gifted. Like I feel beyond gifted. And my wife would tell me that I've put in the work to earn it, but I just still to this day, there's things that happen every month that I'm like, holy crap, I can't believe that like it truly feels like a gift to me. It does. Everything. Like for several years I got to go backstage at the Arnold Classic, and literally like I'm standing side stage with these guys as they're pumping up. And I just interviewed Victor Martinez, so he knows who I am, and some of the other guys too, and it's like, holy crap, there's been so many cool things. Or recently hanging out with Mutant and getting to travel with them, and get to hang out at their booth and have our listeners come up and stuff. So I feel beyond gifted, but at the same time, man, I feel like that bodybuilding moves really fast, and the things that happened 2 years ago are in the distant past, and the things that happened 5 years ago are ancient history. So I know that, what is happening today, it may not be happening tomorrow. And so I just try to have a lot of gratitude to it, really, truly enjoy myself, and hope that I can keep it up, keep up with the times, and keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's an awesome perspective.
Having a network of, with Ron, Dusty, Andrew Barry, Skip, I'm probably leaving some people out of the equation, but just having like because you call it like a team, does that help with, planning ahead as far as content you're going to put out? How do you go about, structuring? Because I know you're not just, what do you guys want to talk about today? Okay.
Yeah. So it's been great recently on Blood, Sweat, and Gear. Andrew's really stepped up, and he's helped with coming up with ideas, and Skip has too. But those guys have become a lot more creative with it, and I've enjoyed that. That's been pretty cool. Scott Stevenson, he'll oftentimes have some wild study that he's been digging into that he wants to ramble on about for an hour. So we'll do that, or if not, I always have I'll keep a list on my phone of good ideas, for each of the shows. Or if I think of a topic idea for drugs and stuff with Dave Crossland, I'll jot that one down. And usually I try to listen close to the audience. I think that's a big part of being good at a podcast, is listen to what your audience wants, and then try to deliver that to them. So if you have an audience that enjoys the show and they're interactive with you, like I have a Patreon, and I especially listen to those guys, because those guys are literally contributing money to keep the show going, which that blows my mind in itself, and I'll take ideas from them so that we can create the content they want. See, the interesting thing about podcasts versus traditional media is traditional media, the people who were on our side of the camera were untouchable. Like, you may be able to get an autograph from one of them once in a while, but you didn't speak to them. You didn't know them. You didn't have any interaction with them. It was simply a one-way means of communication where they presented something to you, you digested it, period, done. In the case of podcasting, and you guys see it, there's direct feedback. It's a two-way street. And so a lot of the content that we create is viewer generated, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. And that's one of the important things that we have to always remember as podcasters. And that's why it's not just about us, it's really about the audience and what do they want. And so, yeah, I feel like that, to me at this point, the stream of content is endless. It's evolved over time. Like, I used to do a different interview each week with advices, and I did 100 of those over the course of a few years. And I had a bunch of other shows. But I'm not into the interviews as much anymore. Now it's more the sharing content, and we're bringing people on that can share content. And then, I've kind of passed the reins on, like Ron and Dusty will want to do an interview, or we'll bring somebody on Blood, Sweat, and Gear. And that's great, because it allows us to have these cool interactions, and the audience gets to see Skip and Andrew interacting with Nick Walker versus just a one-on-one with me, and I enjoy that. It's been cool. But yeah, I feel like I'm a creative thinker. I started with, art, and it's still, to me, this is just a different version of that, honestly.
Yeah, like a different way for you to express that creativity, where you're bringing it to people in a different way. I've always wondered, because especially now, because you're you were kind of always, like Tommy had mentioned, like you were kind of always like the Wizard of Oz almost, where you were producing some of the shows, but we didn't hear you or see you on some of them for a while, and now you're kind of a staple on all of them. I'd imagine it's probably like saying which of your kids is favorite, where you want to be political and not answer. But which show of yours do you enjoy actually being a part of the most?
Man, all of them, honestly. It really is. They're
Yeah,
all
yeah.
different.
Come on, give me the real answer. Let's go.
They're all different, because I can tell you this, like, having had the opportunity to hang out with Scott Stevenson and get to know him, it's not about the one interview. It's the fact that since 2017, about every other weekend, the first year was with Jordan Peters, and then Jordan moved on to do his own thing because he got popular. But getting to hang out with Scott every other week for a year has completely changed my mindset on training. Like, I think totally different. I've learned so much just by hanging out and listening to him and talking with him, and then developing a friendship, and then the same goes for the other shows. Like, the other shows have evolved, and some of them have had their high points and low points, but they're all constantly evolving. Like it's just, bodybuilding is still evolving right now. It's becoming something different. I really can't go into it because it'd be hard to explain, but it's hard to say, because I really do. I get something different from each one of them. And here's the other thing too, is that each show is kind of at a different educational level. Like, drugs and stuff is often a super basic show, entry level people can find that. And sometimes we get a lot of subscribers that way. They're not ready to hear what Scott Stevenson has to say, but when they are ready, maybe they're ready to step it up to blood, sweat, and gear. And then we get a lot of people that just want the entertainment from It's Just Bodybuilding. It's a fun show. So I have a fun time on that one. But I can't trade the amount of fun I have for the amount of education I get from Muscle Minds. You know what I mean?
Sure. All right, that's fair enough. I'll give you a pass on that one.
Thank you.
Tommy, you got another one for your guy? I have a couple more.
Go ahead, shoot.
Has there been, it's kind of similar, but is there, so not like particular segments, but is there a individual episode or individual podcast that sticks out to you as one that maybe during or while you were setting it up, or maybe after, and you're editing it, that you had almost a sense of, not like I made it, because we're still just like kind of podcasting to like a niche group, but like you were saying before, you never really feel successful. Has there been a podcast, a single episode that sticks out to you? Like, man, like I'm really doing what I set out to do a couple of years ago. Like almost like a singular episode that sticks out to you as maybe your favorite, or one that just jumps off the screen. Like, man, this is when I kind of felt like I was really, really leaning into this and living the way that I'd wanted to live with this.
It's hard to say a specific show, but I honestly get that feeling all the time. Like,
Cool.
There's been times like that I just like look at my phone and I'm like looking at all the people that are in my text. And I'll still to this day think about it like, wow, man, this is really crazy, and then to think like I'm sitting here. So the majority of my day is either, editing shows, recording shows, or working with my clients. And working with clients takes up the majority of the day. It's like, but that said, I probably put in a good 30 plus for maybe going on 40 hours, depending on the week, with podcasting as well. Wow. So it's a full day. Like, I come down to my desk at probably about 7 a.m. and I make a coffee, and then I start kind of fumbling around and looking at maybe check-ins for clients that are competing real soon, people that need to get back to right away. Otherwise, if they're not competitors, I'll get back to everybody else in the afternoon after I'm done podcasting. Podcasting is then usually like the first part of the day, and then I might get to train, and then I do that. And somewhere in there, almost every day, I stop and I just think to myself, like, wow, this is really crazy to think that I created all of this for myself.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
to think, because I remember being the guy who, the company went out of business, and I was sitting on my couch collecting unemployment, getting ready for a contest, and listening to Dave Palumbo, and thinking to myself, like, one day I want to make something out of the fitness industry. I want to be able to make money with it. I still will. I'm still connected to that. And so there's no specific one moment, but I will say that, like, every time, like, just getting a chance to, like we talked about Dave Tate, like to know that like I consider Dave Tate a friend of mine, or I genuinely consider Brandon Curry a friend of mine. We don't talk all the time. If I had something going on and I needed to call him, he would take my call, you know? And it's like, to me though, like having had a chance to talk with these people in those specific podcasts that we've done with them, and I feel that sense all the time. I honestly do. I really do. As cheesy as that sounds.
No, it's not cheesy. And one of the biggest takeaways, just for me as a fan of yours and someone that's followed all your stuff, a big takeaway from all of this is just the gratitude that you have towards all of it, because that's something that you can choose to have on a daily basis. And I'm guilty of that myself, where maybe I don't take time to do that as often as I should. And so the past couple of months with our show, channel, whatever, there's been more of those moments that have forced me to been like, holy shit, dude. Like if the 20-year-old version of yourself could see this, he would be super impressed. Like, you got to take a moment to think that this is really cool.
Yeah.
But a big thing that I noticed from you is just how consistent that is in your perspective about all this. And so that's something for me that I'm gonna take away from this. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I feel like part of it is that I'm in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And so for me, a big part of life is just having that gratitude, because there's a couple instances that had things gone differently, I wouldn't be here today. And had I not got clean, I wouldn't have the life that I do today. So even during the rough times, there's still awesome times. Like I'm really grateful. I really am. That's like, I honestly feel like, you know, in that Christmas Story movie where Scrooge wakes up and like he's completely changed, and after being visited by the ghost of Christmas past and all that, like I feel like that. I really do. Like, it's not just like an act. I remember Adam McVeigh said something one time about how I always acted like I was super, like it was cheesy because I was just like always so excited, but it's like that's just who I am. So, you know, that's what I told him too. So just what it
And one
is.
thing too, Tommy and I spoke about this earlier, or like off air a couple of days ago, whatever. But we had talked about, like, you know, your day like this, when you live a life like this where you're coaching and, you know, you're kind of making it all for yourself, it kind of ends up being a whirlwind every day. And it's stressed, and it just feels like you're this, you know, Ron said this the other day, where, you know, you just wake up and the moment your eyes open, you're struggling to not feel like you're behind already. But when I take a moment to reflect on it, it's like, man, this is the type of stress I would choose. We all have to endure stress on a day-to-day basis. For most of us, we have to have some type of job. We have to provide for ourselves one way or another. I would so much rather get to choose this stress and it be the stress that I wanted to live through, than it to be, you know, I'm working for somebody else. I'm working for some big company. I'm building a business for somebody else. You know, at the end of the day, it's stress, but it's like all of my efforts go back towards what I want it to be. So, it's just being, I think having that gratitude for all of it, the ups and the downs, is a big thing that I'm going to try to take from this. So, yeah, good stuff, man. It's not cheesy. It's authentic. It comes off as authentic from you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I got one more question and we could probably wrap it up. I think we're close to an hour, but if there's a goal that you don't want to keep close to your chest, because I'm that way with goals. If some I don't talk about it until it's time to put it out into the universe. But if there's a goal for Think Big Bodybuilding as a whole in 2024, what's one that you're willing to put out?
I just want to keep growing. You know, I want to keep the show growing. I want to keep it fresh, whatever that means. And because I still don't know. I don't have like a specific thing where like we need to do this in order to keep it fresh. One thing I do want to do is so here's one thing that I've always done is, you know, like I said, I wanted to first start podcasting to educate others. And then when I started getting the opportunity to, have on like great people in the industry, it gave me an opportunity to learn, you know? And so then I thought to myself, well, why don't I listen to other people and listen to what they have to say? So if I have somebody on who's been coaching, you know, high level athletes for the last decade, then what am I really going to add to this conversation? Why don't I just ask the questions? And so that's the way I positioned myself for a long time. And still to this day, a lot of times I do take that position. I'll defer to asking the co-hosts that I'm with and then not answering the questions myself. So much so that I've even had people who are like, "Oh, I didn't know you're a coach, Scott." You know, like, "Oh, Scott's hanging out with the coaches today." You know, it's like, "Oh, okay. You know, maybe I'm doing something wrong here." And I don't really post a lot either, like of my successes and stuff with clients. So I would like to jump into doing standalone videos. Maybe it's a 5-minute video of just me explaining an idea. And maybe it's something as simple as talking about the costs of doing a contest, or maybe it's talking about, estrogen clearance. I don't know, but I would like to start doing some shorter digestible videos that were just me explaining these things, because I do think that sometimes I don't give myself that opportunity on the podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, I told you in a voice memo that I think big, or not think big. It's just bodybuilding elevated when you became a part of the show, and it wasn't just Dusty and Ron anymore. So
yeah,
that's definitely
totally
a venture you should pursue, especially the 5-minute content. I mean, everyone will tune into that. It's because a lot of times on YouTube, you look at the time of something, you're like,
yeah,
55 minutes, that's a long time, but 5 minutes, like, man, I could brush my teeth and listen to that.
Right. And on that note too, by the way, anybody who's still watching this now, thank you guys for having sat through this whole thing. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And man, it just as an outsider and someone, like I said, a fan of yours, someone I hope would consider me a friend, you should be putting that stuff out. Like there should be no hesitation about it, man. Like, especially when you think about the audience that you've built. And like you said, for nearly a decade, you've treated it like you're just this like white belt where you're just absorbing and learning. Like you've had access to the best names in the industry and have sat and listened and learned and, asked them questions and dug in and made them follow up with answers. Man, if there's anybody that can be putting out their own educational materials, it's you. And think about like that audience that you have built. These are people at this point that are bought into your product and what
Absolutely.
you put out. So, there's no question that that audience is going to be receptive to it also. So maybe some turning of the tables where I'm trying to give you some advice, but put it out, man. Put it out.
Appreciate it.
Because we all want to see it. Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it.
But I think that's go ahead.
I've got something here for you guys. I just went over to my Facebook page and I had to dig quite far down, but check this one out, Tommy. Let me see here. Oh, hold on a second. I have to go over to, let's see, we can do it this way. Here we go. Boom. Look at that.
Wow.
That's wild. An idea. I was gonna post that when I throw this one up.
That's a classic.
Wow. That is a classic. Sir. What year is that?
I don't know. I didn't look. I just randomly grabbed it really quick. But
that's 2017.
Is that what it was?
Oh shit.
Okay. Yeah, right before I started prep that year.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. That was out at Royal Oak Gym, and Tommy was wearing the Advices shirt and I was wearing the old Advices shirt. So I was like, hey, let's get a picture together here really quick. I brought the other one too that I've got of us, Tommy. And this is small Tommy here. This is not the Tommy you guys know.
Wow, skinny Tommy.
Heavyweight. Still hair too.
Yeah. So that was a minute back. That was light heavyweight.
Yeah, you look peeled.
Thank you. Was that 2017 as well? Yeah,
that was the Western.
Yeah, that might have been the last show that I did, honestly, now that I think about it.
Wow.
And I made a lot of progress since then, and then I had gotten sick, so then I lost a lot of progress too. But I'm feeling like things are coming back around. I'm starting to grow some muscle again, so we'll see. I was going to say,
is the competitive career over, or is you leaving the door open on a comeback, or what?
So I always competed in light heavyweight, and in that picture I was like 193, something like that. And I was pretty peeled, like I didn't have 5 more pounds to lose or anything. That was as lean as I could get. Actually, I think I was 193 in the previous show in September, and then I held out to that show. And by then I was here's something I learned by doing that show. people ask, they're like, do you have to be a competitor to coach competitors? And I don't necessarily think you have to, but I'll tell you what, if you have, you're going to have a lot more insight, you know,
Yes.
which you
I
guys
agree.
both understand. And one thing that I did there was I got super lean, you know, and then by the time that I decided, I'm like, well, you know what? November is not too far away from September. Let's just keep dieting. I required more food and I was
Mhm.
able to fill back out and I was able to reduce the cardio. And I
Yeah.
actually, by then I was like 197 versus the previous show, I was 193. And I was probably a little bit leaner too. So, you know,
Yeah.
through that, I started thinking to myself, well, why don't I start getting people ready a little bit earlier, you know,
Yes.
and then give them that time to fill back out. So that's something I've employed, you know, with everybody that I can. Of course, it's an ideal world. It doesn't always add
Sure.
up that way. But yeah,
It doesn't work when you get somebody at 10 weeks out from another coach and they're
oh
fat.
God, no, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. But
No,
I'll
that's
tell you
awesome.
what, man, I gained a lot of muscle after that. Like
Right.
pre-pandemic, I started
Yep.
getting strong, and then into the close downs and all that, I started training from home and I got stronger and I got close to 240. And
Yeah.
I said to myself, you know what, if people were asking me at the time, they're like, you going to compete again? And I was like, would you ever compete again? And I thought to myself, well, I don't want to do the same thing I've done. I didn't want to bring that package again. So I was like, if I could gain another 10 pounds, which I'm pretty confident I can do the way things are going. I was just using 600 tests and things were like really cranking.
Nice.
I was like, I could see myself doing it, but for now, I'm just going to focus on this, on getting stronger. And then unfortunately I got sick and I'm still struggling, honestly, with being able to bring the intensity. But that said,
Yeah.
I'm starting to experiment with reps in reserve.
Okay.
And if I don't take things to absolute failure, what ends up happening is if I do take things to failure the way I love training, then it ends up messing up my like my CNS just gets shot.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and then I'm down for like 2 weeks and my mood goes down, my appetite
Yeah.
goes to zero, I get a lot of brain fog. But if I don't take it to that failure, I can keep going. I can train the next day. So I'm starting to think that the key might be not training to absolute failure the way I love. And, you
Yeah.
know, at the end of the day, I still love training no matter what. So I want to do what I can to stay in the gym. So I'm
Right.
figuring it out. We'll put it that
Yeah.
way.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave the door open then on it. And that's a common theme. Tommy and I have talked about it on this show many times where, you know, at a certain point in bodybuilding, I think we all reach a point where we realize we have to start to do at least some things because we need to do them this way, not so much because we want to do them a particular way. So
Yeah.
that's just another example, you know, how you're training, you know, 3 weeks out when you're already peeled, the way that Tommy has been just holding like stage conditioning for weeks. You know, we've talked about it where he's had to kind of undergo that maturation where you can't just go in and rip heavy shit off the floor all the time. Like there
Mm-mm.
needs to be kind of some thought to it. And we know how Tommy likes to train, but right now that's different than maybe how Tommy needs to train. So yeah, that's just another good example of it. But we're
Stimulate,
right
don't
at
annihilate. That starts to make sense as you age, I think.
yeah, absolutely. But we're right at an hour, and you know we know how busy you are. You're the master behind the scenes with podcasting, coaching, all of it. So we really appreciate the time, man. Is there anything that you want to plug? I mean, obviously the channel, the coaching, but you know, anything that you want to throw out there?
I just want to say thank you guys. You guys are just so nice to me, and I really appreciate that. I'm grateful that you guys have seen the channel and what we've done. You know, in the scope of things, you know, Victoria and I went on a walk the other day, and there was one of those benches that somebody had in the woods. It was it was like in memory of this
Mm,
woman. And I thought, oh, maybe she liked walking on this trail. And there's this giant boulder next to her and next to the bench. And I thought to myself, you know, that boulder has been there for so long, like probably since the beginning of time. And the scope of that woman's life was like a blink compared to the boulder. And I thought to myself, you know, at the end of the day, that's what my life is going to be too. So it's nice to feel like I've had a positive influence while I've been here, and that's all we can do. So I'm really happy that for that, and just thank you guys. I appreciate your time here and for your generosity. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely, man. The pleasure was all ours. You continued to kind of lead the way and lead the charge and lead by example for all of us. And you continue to give us access and information that we wouldn't have anywhere else. And so I speak for the rest of the industry at large when I say that bodybuilding is a better place because of you, Scott. So we thank you for all that effort. We thank you for the time here. So for Scott Mcnally, for Tommy Styles, I'm Joseph PIRCHER. This was a Thinking Man's podcast. And until next time, guys, we are out.